Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Sono Basics. It's an honor for us to stand here in front of you this year, as we have last year.
We have been on board Sono for you for several years now, and we always experience this event as a gathering of Sono enthusiasts. It's a pleasure for us to be part of this electrifying atmosphere.
I remember when we've been here the first time a few years ago, it was a very intense and challenging learning experience this weekend.
It was nice, actually. Big learning progress. Yeah.
So, as it can be challenging sometimes, our aim of this lecture is to give you a smooth entrance into the topic and to tune in the right wavelength and frequency. Matthias, what do you think should we talk about today?
I think we should start with some technical basics, because they build our foundation. After that, we will go on and talk about artifacts, because they can be quite annoying, but they are also quite useful in our imaging process, as we will experience later.
And we should talk about handling, orientation, and finally come to some practical application.
Now we want to do this presentation a bit more interactive. So please take out your phones, scan that QR code, or go to menti.com and type in that number. And we will have some questions for you.
So, our first question is, what is your association with ultrasound or with sonography? Please type in and submit.
You see the number ups on the upper side. You can just go to menti.com.
Okay, someone wants to become pregnant. Emergency, Bad Bunny. Okay. Very interesting. More and more words coming in. It's so amazing to talk to such a crowd and also to so many people being here, attending us over the live stream from other cities. And we have 78, 80. Okay, we have a lot of feedback here. Great. So, this is our association with ultrasound. Bats are masters of sonography. They emit sound waves and receive them and get an image of their surrounding without any visual input.
We actually can do the same thing as a bat. Just imagine a thunderstorm, and you want to know how far is it away. You just count the seconds and divide them by 3, then you know the distance in kilometers. And basically that is what our ultrasound device is doing all the time. It's just counting the seconds.
So, sound waves do have a certain velocity, and they have different velocity in different media. In water, sound is much faster than in air. And in solid structures, like the rails of a train, it's becoming even faster. And you can hear the train long time before you would hear it through air. And at that point, we want to bring in one term, impedance. Impedance, non-academically spoken, is the ability of a medium of being penetrated by sound waves. And sometimes when a sound wave comes from one media to another, we have an impedance step or an impedance jump. And as last year, we have noticed that nowadays medical students already have far more knowledge about sonography. We already want to bring in our first question, and we want to ask a lot of questions to you today. So, what happens when an impedance step occurs? Do they cause a strong absorption of the sound waves? Do they cause heat in the tissue? Do impedance steps cause a strong reflection on sound waves? Perfect. Very well. So there's also some absorption and heat always happening in these interactions. But the most important is that you have a strong reflection at an impedance step. I see you already have a lot of basic knowledge.
In this image, you can see an impedance step happening. The diver inside of the water, he's not able to hear the sound of the speaker because between air and water, there's a big impedance step. And so all of sound waves are reflected. But he's able to hear, obviously, the sound which is emitted inside of the water. Now we want to talk about how ultrasound is generated. And in our ultrasound probe, there's a crystal, a piezo crystal. If you apply an electrical current to this crystal, it deforms, and if it has a certain frequency, a sound wave is emitted. This effect works in two directions. If a sound wave is emitted backwards and hits our crystal, it deforms again and generates an electrical impulse. And our ultrasound device measures this and shows it us on the screen. You know that concept from your lighter, where you click, actually the inside is piezo crystal, and you got a flame. Now we have a next question for you. Sound waves are reflected depending on the density of tissue, the content of water or fat inside the tissue, or the amount and the degree of impedance steps. Quite equally. But the correct answer is the amount and the degree of impedance steps. Actually, the density, it doesn't matter for us. It's just when an impedance step occurs, a reflection is happening. And if there's a dense but very homogeneous tissue, there's no impedance or no change in impedance, so no impedance step, which means we get no reflection at all.
So again, you have the piezo crystal emitting a sound wave, and you have two impedance steps in this image, the yellow and the orange point. And they send back a reflection, and while that, the machine is measuring the time. And by the time measured, it can calculate where from in the image does the reflection come. And it can also measure the intensity of the reflection, which is shown here in form of an amplitude. And this was actually the first ultrasound images we had, diagrams of amplitudes, so-called A mode. Later on, this was translated into a grayscale depending on the intensity. And if you align a lot of these crystals, and you have these different grayscales, you get a B mode, brightness mode picture. The picture everyone knows from ultrasound imaging every day.
That was a nice scheme, Romeo. But let me ask you a totally different question. If you want to annoy your neighbor, would you turn up the bass line of your music or the high tones?
Well, if I would like to annoy my neighbor, of course, I would turn up the volume of the bass line.
Correct. And you do that because a lower frequency allows us not only to penetrate the walls of a building, but also to penetrate deeper inside of the body. And we can have a deeper look inside. But there are also probes which are using a high frequency. And actually, why should we use them? Because, as you can see, we cannot look that deep with them. Well, a high frequency means we have a short wavelength, and a short wavelength means we can see smaller structures. And this is why we get a better resolution in compromising the penetration depth. Romeo, maybe you can give us an overview. Which probes do we actually have?
Okay, let's just have a short overview. Here you see a linear probe. You have a big body surface area, and you have a lot of crystals with a high frequency aligned. So you don't get a very deep image, but you get a very high resolution, like you see on the next image. The next probe, which is very important, is the curved probe, the curvilinear probe. There you have crystals that emit a very low frequency, and you have, again, a big surface area, so you can penetrate deep and have a big surface, so you get very big images, and you can get a nice overview in big anatomic areas or scan big organs, as you see on this image of the liver and the kidney. And finally, an important probe is the sector,
The phased
area probe, which has a very little surface area, body contact area, but it has crystals with a very low frequency, and these crystals are moving around.
Wait. Now.
Are moving around, so still we get a big image, but with a low resolution, of course, as you see on this image. So again, what it looks like in our ultrasound machine, this is the phased array, the linear, and the curvilinear probe.
Again, we have a question for you. What probe would you use to scan the organs of each area? Okay, we are quite clear on this one. Well, the linear probe you will use for superficial structures like vessels in the neck. Our phased array we will use for scanning the heart, because we have to look through a small intercostal space, but still we want to see a big picture of the heart. And last but not least, our curved array we can use for big organs like in the abdomen.
So let's have a short talk about orientation on the image. It's very important. On each probe, you have a little notch, a little marking that we call the nose. And in usual ultrasound examinations, if we have a longitudinal section, we always put the probe's nose directing to the patient's nose. So the area close to the probe may be anterior or lateral, and distal from the probe may be dorsal or medial, depending on where you position it. And here you have the cranial, and here the caudal area. If you have a transversal section, you always point the probe's nose to the examiner's nose. Oh yeah, and very important to mention, this point on the image refers to the nose of the probe. So in a transverse section, this would be the right side of the patient, the left side of the patient, or the more medial area, and yeah. So that's important for orientation.
Now we want to talk about terminology. Maybe Romeo, at this point, you can describe this picture for us.
Well, at that point of our presentation, for me it looks like grads normally in October or November. All grayish.
I have to give you this one, but we have to be a bit more precise. This is why we painted some arrows there. The orange one refers to area which is all blackish, which means we get no echo from this point, which is why we call it unechogenic. The green one refers to a dark area, so we get at least a little bit of echo, which is why we call it hypoechogenic. And the blue arrows, they refer to bright areas, and we call them hyperechogenic. And we made two of these because sometimes you need to compare the brightness of different areas. And if they have a similar brightness, we can use the term isoechogenic.
Well, so we had a repetition of some basic aspects, and I don't know what of this was even new to you, because you answered the questions quite well. So now we want to challenge you, and we want to dive a little bit more deeper into clinical context. What you see on this image is the macropathologic image of a liver, and you see a round, nodular, solid lesion. And if you have a look on the histopathologic image, yeah, you see cellular abnormalities, but you have a continuous tissue. So this is a hepatocellular carcinoma. On this image, you see a blackish, spongy, soft lesion, again in the liver. And this is the hemangioma of a liver. And in the histopathologic image, you see connective tissue, you see huge caverns filled with erythrocytes, and you have a lot of change. And if you think back to our concept of the impedance steps, now we go to sonopathology, and we would like to ask you, the white lesion in the liver you see in this image, what is it most likely to be? A hepatocellular carcinoma or a hemangioma?
Some discussions happening.
I hear some murmuring in the audience.
Yes.
And we are still in the basics lecture. We don't expect you to know sonopathologies. But you can see you need the basics to understand advanced
Almost
application.
50-50.
Almost 50-50. So let's see what's right. It's a hemangioma. And we will explain why. So if we go back to histology, in the hemangioma we see there is a lot of impedance steps. You have connective tissue, you have liquid, connective tissue, a lot of impedance steps. And that's what creates an echo. That's why this hyperechoic lesion is most likely to be a hemangioma. While here you have, in the hepatocellular carcinoma, you have quite continuous tissue. And it's not so different to liver tissue itself, seen from an impedance perspective. And that's why in sonography, the hepatocellular carcinoma would be not so different from the hepatic healthy tissue. And you would actually need other modalities with contrast agents, or you could also do an ultrasound scan with contrast agents to diagnose the hepatocellular carcinoma. But that's topic of another talk.
And we have another example of this one. On the right, you see a hyperechogenic liver. On the left, you see a hypoechogenic liver, always compared to the kidney. And in the middle, you see an isoechogenic liver compared to the kidney. The middle one is a healthy liver. And our next question for you is, which one would you think has the hepatic steatosis? The bright one or the dark one? Okay, it's quite more clear on this one.
Yeah, but still, first I heard some murmuring. Now I see some smoke over the head. Do you see? Okay.
And we have
Very
to go
well
back
done.
for histology for this one again. Yeah. On the left one, on your left side, you see the hepatic steatosis, where we have a lot of adipocytes and connective tissue, or scar-like connective tissue in the middle. And on the right side, we have healthy liver parenchyma, which looks quite homogeneous. And this is why in our hepatic steatosis, we have, again, a lot of changes of impedance. And between every change, there's an impedance step. and generates us an echo. And so from the hepatic steatosis, we got more echo, which results in a brighter image.
Nice to see a learning experience.
Now we want to introduce two more imaging modes. Karim and Robert, we need your help. Karim? We want to talk about the M mode, the motion mode, and the Doppler. The M mode, or called motion mode, is for tracking movements over time. On this image, you see a scan of a heart. The probe scans just through the heart. And next to it, you see the A mode, where you just see the amplitudes of the echo which is generated. Next to it, you see the B mode, where the level of amplitude is translated into a grayscale. And on the right, you see the motion mode, where now the changings over time are shown. And we want to demonstrate that live. Wait, we have to go there. And can you change to ultrasound device technique? Okay, nice. You can see here the wonderful heart of Robert. And if Karim puts an axis through the heart, just give him a little bit. And now he confirms it. We can see the movements on this line aligned over time. And this is quite helpful to see the changes, in this case of the heart, the left ventricle, during diastole and systole. Now we can get back to our presentation. And we continue with the next question for you. In analyzing which tissues can it be useful to use the M mode? Several answers are possible.
And we're aware that it's a challenging question again, but we don't want you to fall asleep. Mm-hmm. Okay. So let's talk this one through. The M mode, you need motion. You need enough motion in a certain time, so you would notice a lot of difference. The M mode is really good mode to quantify this. And mostly, you would need motion in the axis that you put for analysis. So, for the extrusion of the mitral valve leaflet, you have a good axis, you have a lot of movement. It's an old measurement, there are better measurements, but it's a possible application of M mode. For peristaltic movement, you have very slow and little movement, and it's in another direction. So we don't need to quantify it anyways, and that's not a really good use for M mode. The vena cava, with its strong pulsation and collapsation, is very good to measure with M mode and to quantify it. And as you will see later on in these days, also the lung sliding can be objectivied with M mode. For the pulsation of the carotid artery, you have very little pulsation compared to what is happening in this vessel. You have a lot of blood flow and very little movement. So for this one, we need another mode. For this one, we use the Doppler mode. And to most of you, the Doppler effect is a known physical phenomenon. The Doppler effect means that a body that is in movement and reflects or emits a sound wave emits it differently to different directions. So if this body is going away from us, it would reflect the sound wave with a lower frequency. And if it would come directing to us, it would emit or reflect the sound wave with a higher frequency. And we can apply that on moving erythrocytes in a vessel. And I would ask now to switch again to the ultrasound machine, please. So we will have a demonstration of an ultrasound of the carotid artery, where we just said M mode is not the right mode. And Karen is putting B mode picture of the carotid. It's good enough for demonstration. And there you see movement. And you can also see if it's moving towards you or away from you. You can say, is this a vessel, yes or no? And if we switch back to the presentation, thank you very much, Karen and Samuel. Please give it up for them. So on this image, you see another example that we did in our Sono lab at neurology department. It's an intracranial vessel, a cerebral vessel. And we wanted to see if there is vasoconstriction at this patient. So you can also get the flow profile of the vessels and get a lot of information out of that. But again, you need to know the settings, you need technical, physical basics, and it's a topic for another talk. But who is interested in that can come by the neurology department in Steyr, and we will have a closer look on it.
Now we want to cover artifacts. Which artifact can you see in this picture? Well, most of you probably already know this one. It's called the mirroring artifact. The mirroring artifact happens if our sound wave travels inside of the body and then hits a structure which has a big impedance step. So mostly all sound waves are reflected. And they are reflected, as you can see, inside of the liver. There they are hitting, in this picture, our hemangioma, travel back to the diaphragm and back upwards. But our ultrasound device cannot know this. So it just shows us the structure deeper behind the diaphragm, where normally the lung is supposed to be, because our ultrasound device is just counting time.
Why do we have the reflection at that point?
Because we have tissue before it, then we have the diaphragm, and then comes the lung. And the lung, in most cases, is filled with air, and between tissue and air, we have a very big impedance step.
So the next artifact we want to cover is the reverberation artifact. And again, you have two impedance steps. You have two changes of media, two structures. And it can happen when these sound waves are reflected that they would be reflected between these two structures for several times before they go back to the probe. And again, by time measurement, the probe thinks these structures would be much deeper in the tissue, and it creates lines, reverberations. And on this image, you can see reverberation artifacts. This is a lung ultrasound. So here you have the skin. Down here you have a layer. This is the pleural. And the skin and the pleura, they cause reverberations within the lung tissue. And you see these lines here. And in the lung, they are actually called A lines. And they are very important information. So you will hear about that in another lecture this weekend, I guess.
Our next artifact is the acoustic shadowing artifact. You maybe also know this one. If our sound beams are hitting a structure which does not let penetrate any sound waves, and everything is reflected backwards, we get no echo from behind it or from below it, which is why behind it everything is unechogenic. You can see it in this example in a gallbladder stone. And good for us, the shadowing is actually pointing like an arrow onto the stone. so we can see it more easily. But in this case, it's quite a big stone, so it's hard to not see it.
And the last artifact we will cover today is the acoustic enhancement. So deeper in the organs, less sound beams would arrive and would be reflected. So you need, the machine makes an artificial amplification of those sound beams to have it equally bright. But if there is a structure like here, where you have a cyst, which is not reflecting sound beams, more sound beams arrive dorsal of it, and so more sound beams would be reflected. And by the artificial amplification, this appears much more bright than this area. It's called acoustic enhancement artifact. And again, we have quite a challenging question for you. If you have a close look on this image, how many artifacts would you recognize? Twelve, 13, 14 people? Let's give some more time.
Almost 50.
Okay.
Who gives more?
Very well. I think it's a very good result. So actually, we see 4 artifacts, but who found 3 would get the point. In this image, most would recognize the mirroring artifact of this vessel in the liver. Again, we have the liver, we have the diaphragm, and the mirror. Here we have a cystic structure, or again a vessel, and we have dorsal enhancement. And again, we have the skin, and we have peritoneum, which cause some reverberation. And if you have a very close look, you would see some dark structures at the borders of our image, which are shadows of ribs. So we have acoustic shadow artifact here. So actually, you can see 4 artifacts, at least 4 artifacts on this image. So this athlete doing an immense stunt on the image is what we dream of when we hold an ultrasound probe. And this is because we have a lot of axes that we can move around. We have a lot of freedom, a lot of angles that we can get. And that's a big advantage about the ultrasound examination. But at the beginning, this can make you lost. You need to go step by step as the athlete, not to have a bad landing. So in our opinion, it's very important to be aware of the kinds of movement you can do with the probe. Only do one movement at a time and do it slowly. By that, you won't lose the structures you're analyzing. And at that point of the presentation, we need some support. We need a voluntary from the audience. Don't be afraid. Any voluntary? Yeah, please. So, great. Please come to the side. What's your name?
Sam, hi.
Sam?
Yeah.
Sam,
Give it up for Sammy. So,
Okay,
Sammy,
Sam.
we have prepared something for you. We have
prepared
brought a little ultrasound
a
probe.
little ultrasound probe. Okay. Just hold it like this. And we want to cover our basic movements, which we can do. Our first movement is a walking movement from the left to the right, like this. Maybe a little bit slower. Nice.
Great.
Our next movement is a fanning movement, like backward and upward. Exactly. Our next two movements are a sliding movement in plane. We go from the left to the right. Nice. And a sliding movement out of plane. In this case, forward and backward. And our last movement is a rotation movement, where you can rotate the probe counterclockwise or clockwise.
You think he's ready?
We think you're ready for level 2 now.
Okay. So, Sammy?
Yeah.
Don't worry.
Okay.
We will blindfold you. But you will have our full support.
Yeah.
Are you aware of the movements?
Yeah, I hope so.
Great. Oh, not so good with this. Okay. Okay. Little test. Great. Awesome.
Okay.
Just give us a second, Sammy.
And we make sure you won't fall out of stage. No worries.
Mostly it works. Okay, Sammy, please lift up the probe. Great. Okay, Sammy, we will give you some instructions and we will guarantee you will be successful without even seeing. So please start with a sliding movement out of plane.
Just one step forward. The sliding movement out of plane. So you go just a little bit forward in this case. Another step. and
Okay,
stop here.
great, stop.
Yeah, okay, so with my whole body.
Great. So now I would ask you to do a fanning movement. Other direction, please.
Yeah.
Great. Slowly. Okay, okay.
Should I also
Fan,
fan
stop,
with
stop.
my body, or?
No. You just fan a little bit more and then you stop. Okay, stop. Now we ask you to do exactly in this position a slow rotation clockwise. A rotation clockwise.
Yeah, I'm thinking about the clock.
To the right.
Okay, stop. Okay. Let's do a little fanning movement to the other direction. Very, very slow. Stop. A little bit more. Okay, that is great. And maybe we will, because you did it perfect, but we failed with our, okay, perfect. Stay where you are. Sammy, congrats. You did your first scan of a heart, longitudinal section. Give it up for Sammy. And we are so proud of you. So you get a little heart for yourself to take home.
Nice. Thanks.
Thank you, Sammy.
Thank you, sir. Next topic. Romeo, what do you think of this picture?
Not so nice.
What do you think of this picture now?
David, Matthias, sorry. We are doing a lecture about sono basics. What's the point? What does it have to do with ultrasound?
You can start describing this picture to us.
Okay. Well, I guess it's a scan of a liver. And we see an anechoic structure with a dorsal enhancement. So, and with a round shape, which I guess could be the cross-section of a big vessel, like the portal vein, or it could be a hepatic cyst, but actually I'm not quite sure.
Well, and how can you be sure? Maybe you take a second perspective.
Okay, so with the cross-section and the longitudinal section of our structure, now I can obviously see it's a gallbladder. And you will also see it after this weekend.
And this actually is the point of this one. Always take at least two perspectives, so you can be sure what you are analyzing. Now we come to our control part, because we need to handle our machine. This actually is our machine. Looks quite difficult and always reminds us on our old remote control of our TV. How many of these buttons did you actually ever use? Maybe 3, 4? Good for us, there's an alternative. We only need 3 buttons, basically, to control our ultrasound device. We need a freeze button. It's the biggest one, it's most important. So if we are looking for a structure and you find it, just hit the freeze button and you can analyze it without any stress or losing it. Then we have the gain to make the image more bright or more dark to see better contrasting. And we have the depth where we can adjust the penetration depth. And as you maybe remember, if you have a deeper penetration, we need to use a lower wavelength, which gives us a lower resolution image. But if we are looking for a superficial structure, we can use a low penetration depth, and so a high frequency, which gives us a better resolution image. And we did the same thing with our ultrasound device. We only have 4 buttons left, and the 4th one is for turning the device on and off.
So it's time to come to the last part of our presentation, to clinical appliance. So we want to present the POCUS to you. POCUS means point of care ultrasound. And this includes 2 messages. Point of care ultrasound is using the ultrasound machine anytime at the patient's bed, every day in your clinical rotations, and asking simple questions that you can answer mostly with a yes or no. Is there liquid? Yes or no. Is there a stone? Yes or no. And those are the questions and the applications that are simple. You can do it soon, and you should do it as much as you can. And this will be your first use of ultrasound.
And for advancing these, we have a concept which is called 5P, which is brought to us from Gregor Prosen, a colleague from Maribor, who taught to us some years ago at this event. Just think of a patient who has difficulties in breathing and a low oxygen saturation. Maybe he could have a pleural effusion. And for that, we can do an ultrasound to see if it's true. What probe would we use? For lung ultrasound, in most cases, we would use our linear probe, but we can also use our curved probe. Actually, it doesn't matter so much in this case. What position do we have to put the patient and the probe? Well, a pleural effusion we see mostly on the back of the patient, so it's optimal if he's sitting and bending forward slightly. So we make the intercostal space a bit wider or bigger. Next one, what picture would we expect? If there's fluid inside the pleura, we would expect a dark area because fluid is homogeneous, so we won't get any echo from this, and this is why it's dark. And we also need to adjust the gain to make the image bright enough, or if it's too bright, darker, so we can see a good contrast. And we need to turn in the right penetration depth. So if he has quite a huge pleural effusion, you want to be sure you cover all of it, so you can measure it and see the amount. Or if it's just a little bit, take a lower penetration, so you won't oversee it. And last but not least, our patient care integration. What can we do for our patient if we diagnose the pleural effusion? Well, we can do a puncture, obviously.
So this is the last slide. This is about you and your learning process. Right now, you are this little blue square. And the white square is the sonar world. Very soon, you will fill up, maybe within this weekend, you will fill up the square more and more. And you should not be shocked when you notice that the white square is a little bit bigger. So what's the message behind it? Firstly, it's very important in sonography to always stay humble, try to be aware of your limitations, of the exam's limitations, because otherwise it can be dangerous to make decisions as a consequence of your sound. And don't be frightened when you notice the universe of sonography. Just think back about the little blue square where you have been at the beginning and where you now.
And we are coming to an end here. We formulated some take-home messages for you. Well, there's no advanced performance without proper basics, as you saw. They are the foundation of understanding why an image is bright or why an image is dark and what can we see there. And your mindset always matters. You need to stay motivated, stay focused, and don't get frustrated.
And we also think it's always very important to cope to a structured procedure. So we want to say thank you to the whole institution of Sono4U Graz, to our colleagues, in front of all to Simon Orlob, David Prokathofer, people that we adapted some of their concepts and even some of their slides to our presentation. And we want to say thank you to all of you for your, and also on the live stream, for your attention. Thank you very much.
Are there any questions from the audience or the online participants? Any questions? Just raise your hands and we'll give you a mic. And if not, I have a question.
I think 3 of the mics.
You have 2 mics in front.
Social distance.
The question is to each of you individual. So, same question, or maybe you both can answer. How has Sono4U influenced your studies in the past, and how does it influence now at your workplace today?
You want to start?
You can start.
Okay. So for me, the special thing in Sono4U was doing some things on your own. Do what you think is important, and do not just cope to the books, to the lectures, to what you are supposed to learn. And always be problem-oriented, and do it in an association. Come together with other students, exchange, and bring some humor in, have events, have a great social time. That's also a very important part, not just of our learning process, but also of our profession and of the codex of medical doctors that should cooperate together.
Yeah, I stick with you, Romeo. Getting to know so many nice people. These events, the summer schools, always a great learning experience. Past in the days and now as well. And for sure, now if you're on a ward and you have some questions, maybe if it's just like an access, a vascular access, and you can't bring it, you don't see anything because I'm at the moment at the oncology department. Veins are not so good. So sometimes you can just take an ultrasound probe, look with a Doppler, for example, for a vessel, and then puncture it. And I think we will cover this topic again this weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Very much.